here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week is going to be the turn of R.B. Russell, or Raymond to his friends, who wrote a book which came out last year called 50 Forgotten Records, which is a fascinating read, and I'll put a link to it in the notes below. But he's had a life in publishing, but also an interest in music, beginning with the early years of the Bollweevils, all the way from Sheffield, that you'll hear about in this fascinating interview. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject of the early formative years. Raymond, it's over to you.
Well, my first record, embarrassingly, was Gary Glitter's "I Love You, Love Me, Love." It was bought for. But my first, the first records I fell in love with were my parents' record collection. They had a wonderful collection from the early 60s when they were going to youth club. And my dad and his mate, Richard, used to go into Lewis and buy records for the youth club. And I think my dad ended up with quite a lot of them. So they had early Beatles and they had Stones, but they had some amazing records that, because when I came along, they'd given up listening to them. Me and my sisters were allowed to play with their records and put them on this sort of dance set that we had. And we'd stack up 6 or 7 at a time and listen to all kinds of stuff. You know, Barry Maguire's The Eve of Destruction and Johnny Cash. And but I absolutely fell in love with the Shadows. That was my sort of really big love.
Right.
Because the Shadows sing songs, I mean, they're all instrumental, obviously. They just sounded like the theme tunes to the best TV series ever, because they had titles like Man of Mystery and FBI and Apache. I just thought they were absolutely wonderful. And I fell in love with Judith Durham from the Seekers, because my dad would very sort of cannily, he would wait until a record had been re-released with at least sort of 2 or 3 singles on an EP, at which point there'll be sleeve notes and there'll be pictures. And I would pore over the sleeve notes, have no idea what was going on, in Australia where the Seekers came from or what was being talked about. But, there would be pictures, unlike the original 45s when they came out. The original singles just came in generic sleeves. My dad's had this wonderful artwork. But they did have absolutely appalling albums. There was plenty of Nana Mouskouri. So Gene Pitney, which I didn't appreciate at the time, but I can appreciate now. But lots of John Denver and Elvis's less impressive albums.
Right, so they were that side of things. Well, it's kind of strange because my parents, I think they were that generation when they didn't ever borrow money. So I think when they got together, they sold everything, including their record collection. So a record player appeared in the house in the early 70s, and there was just a handful of records they had, one being Jim Reeves, which slightly sort of, I don't know, it's just awful. But I used to hear this a lot. But they also randomly bought those ones, like you were talking about, soundtracks to films and TVs. Oh, I think it was Great War themes. So they had things like 633 Squadron, Hannibal Brooks, and all the Great Escapes. So they were all very dramatic. So soundtracks were quite a sort of a popular thing in our house for a year.
The Dam Busters theme tune and 633 Squadron, wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, God, they still... Music. Like I said, I still sort of couldn't sneak those on. But it was my brother, as you know, who was 7 years older, that suddenly started appearing with his kind of prog rock period of records that I found kind of fascinating during that period, because I'd sneak into his room to listen to them. And at the time, I had no idea what all this was, even the solo work of Rick Wakeman. But 2 albums he did have, which I loved, was Sgt. Pepper and also Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. And I thought, God, this is brilliant, But at the same time, this would have been the kind of early to mid 70s, so there was no cultural context to any of these things. It was quite, looking back on it, it's just like, oh yes, the Beatles had only just broken up, and yet it felt like another decade, didn't it? Well, it was another whole period of life.
Well, in the 70s, my family was still listening to music from the 50s and the 60s, so I kind of missed all the glam rock. I missed Bowie. when I started listening to music properly in the charts, it would be about 1979. So it was the latter end of well, where punk became new wave and post-punk. So listening to the first record I was meant to have bought was "I Don't Like Mondays" by the Boomtown Rats, and I was going into Helsham to go with my 99p to buy a copy of it. And my mum persuaded me not to buy the single, but to buy a C90 cassette so I could tape the music off the radio, which was utterly inspired. And I know that at the time, records would have "home taping is killing music."
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
But I really embraced home taping. But what it did was it allowed me to decide which records I really wanted. And then I didn't tell my mum, but a couple of weeks later, I went back and I bought "I Don't Like Mondays" anyway, because I wanted to have that little 7-inch black disc in a picture sleeve.
Well, absolutely. Yes, the trusty TDK D90 cassette was kind of something else, really, wasn't it?
Well, that was a bit posh for me. I was buying the Woolworth's own cassettes, which had a warmer noise, shall we say. The fidelity was fairly low.
Yes, and I just we belonged to a record library eventually, and that was kind of for £5 a year. You could just take out 4 records at a time, so it became a little bit of an obsession to just record everything and anything, just to build up this collection. For some, and again, you don't know why, but some things you become obsessed with. So that was definitely, after sort of being bored of Yes and Genesis and Wishbone Ash, it was like, what do you listen to next? And it was a little bit tricky because being brought up in the countryside in East Anglia, it was a bit behind the times, which is a huge understatement, because it was status quo basically and heavy metal. And you would get beaten up if you even thought, even mentioned the Beat or the Specials or Two Tone. It was really kind of weird, but you would just get called a ponce and beaten up for it. So there you go.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose just about everyone relies on knowing, either having brothers and sisters who are older, which I didn't, or friends who are a bit older. So I had a couple of mates, initially a friend called Stumpy and another friend called Nick later, who discovered punk. I mean, they were a few years too late for punk, but it was through Stumpy. I remember sitting in his bedroom listening to Adam and the Ants for the first time. And he had several Susie and the Banshees singles, and just realizing there was this whole world out there. And what we discovered then was the American version of punk, which we had re-imported back into the States. So we were listening to the Dead Kennedys, and I just thought they were the most amazing and frightening band ever.
Yes.
It's really strange. A few years ago, when their videos started appearing on YouTube, I remember sort of trying to watch, California Uber Alles or something. I was expecting to be really frightened, and they looked like such jolly, friendly young men. The noise they made, I just thought was scary as hell, and very exciting because of it.
Yes. And when did you discover the John Peel show at some stage in your during the 80s? What sort of period was that? When did Peel suddenly appear?
It's got to be about sort of 82 or 83. Because again, friends were listening to Peel. I had an earlier bedtime, so I had to find ways of taping Peel without my parents knowing. And then I would listen to the tape the next day when I was doing my homework, and with a DIN plug and another cassette player, I would tape from my tape and make compilations. So they were getting even more degraded on my Woolworths tapes.
Yes, but, you didn't upgrade.
I remember hearing, I think the first time that Peel played the Smiths, and thinking, wow, that's astounding. And I was constantly rejigging these tapes and deciding I didn't like a particular song. So I would have it all carefully set up to tape another song over a song, and they never quite worked out properly.
Oh, God, that was risky.
And I had all kinds of bits of Peel between the songs talking. So there are certain songs that I still expect to hear Peel talking afterwards and making some comment about the weather or,
the pig. He was often mentioning the pig, wasn't he? Or his early children, and having some sort of argument about them eating greens. I did start to get to the point where I used to like his chat between songs almost more than the songs, actually. And I don't know,
Yeah,
it was quite amusing.
he was very amusing, but I think one of the great things about Peel was he would play something pretty appalling, but you knew that the next record could be brilliant. And whenever I taped Peel, I would say every third or fourth song was brilliant, and the others were unlistenable for whatever reason. And we kind of look back and remember Peel as always playing, wonderful indie stuff and great reggae and all kinds, stuff from the 50s and brilliant music. But he did play some awful rubbish as well in between.
Yeah, I think because I never listened to it live because it was just too much, because it was all sort of pretty new to my ears. So I would always record 45 minutes for each show, just put the tape on, go to bed, listen to it the next day, and then listen to it a few times. Because the first time would be like, no, didn't really catch any of that. And then the second or third time, it was actually, and I wouldn't go every I thought if I could get one good track out of that 45 minutes, really good track, not just this is good. Yeah, I enjoyed listening to all the other bits. I felt like it was like taking medicine. It was good to hear, but I wouldn't want to particularly buy it. But I was pleased to have heard it. I think John Waters said, his producer said that where he liked the idea of bands or liked the idea of a sound, John Peel actually did like it. And I kind of could go between those two ideas. I sometimes like the concept and idea of a band more than the reality. And because I sort of think, this is worth being played on sort of national radio. And so and you never knew what you'd like, because sometimes, like you mentioned, a 50s soul track on Kent label would think, my God, I must go and buy that compilation. Or there was the Bundu Boys, who I thought were just brilliant, and then early rap music, and then obviously the indie pop stuff, and Bulgarian folk. So there was always and all the African stuff. Oh yeah, the Bundu Boys. But I just always remember those ones like Thomas McFumo and the Blacks Unlimited, and it felt a bit like an education, as well as sometimes it wasn't always that interesting, but it was probably better than hearing Simon Bates' Your Song, which was quite nauseating at the time. Because I think that's the thing, you don't realise that this was the early 80s, and we had just had the Falkland War, and we got the miners' strike and Green and Common, so it wasn't a particularly jolly time, as I often say, but the soundtrack was amazing.
But it was also one of those things, because it was national radio, you knew at school the next day you could find people who had heard the same thing. Whereas if you go looking for music now on the net, the likelihood of anyone you meet listening to the same things you're listening to is very remote. So it was quite important, not just educationally, but sort of bringing people together. Even if it was a case of, oh my God, he's playing more of that appalling dance music that suddenly appeared.
Happy hardcore.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, yeah, absolutely. I think that shared cultural interest is quite interesting, because you only had 3 stations and eventually 4. But that sort of meant that there was a possibility of a conversation, whereas now I hear people talking about something they might have watched, and it's like everyone else haven't seen it, and I haven't even heard of it, let alone sort of know what they're talking about. So there is a sort of conversational cul-de-sac of doom, isn't there now? Whereas in the old days, you could go and say, did you see Abigail's Party? And everyone would just say, yes, my God, wasn't that? And there was a conversation about it. Mainly there was a strike that night, apparently, and there was only one channel that we all had to watch that one evening. So we all watched Abigail's Party. But those things were just as you said, there was a shared cultural interest that happened.
And it's the same as, C86 as a compilation. Everyone had an opinion about it when it came out, because there were only 3 music papers.
Yes.
Because what would it have been? The Melody Maker, the NME, and Sounds.
Yeah.
And I never knew anyone who ever had the Record Mirror.
I know people keep saying, "Oh, don't forget Record Mirrors." Oh, okay, I won't. There was something called the Catalogue that I occasionally bought, but that was even more obscure. I don't know what record. And Smash Hits, which at the time I just didn't even understand what that was. But yeah, it was like.
Well, so Smash Hits was kind of my way into music journalism, because it was music journalism light, with all the it had all the lyrics and the glossy photos.
Yes.
It's actually in the charts.
Which is quite important, really. I mean, I still find it a bit baffling, the opening few paragraphs of most reviews are just so gibberish that you skip all that and not understand why they've even written it, to try and work out, is this a good song or not, or is this a good live gig or not? And, you know, album of the week or thing of the week was often dreadful because we often got burnt by going off buying them and then thinking, because you didn't have the opportunity sometimes to even listen to a record for 20 seconds. So their idea of album of the week could have just been based on being given lots of cocaine at a party, probably. So, as someone once told me.
I will go straight into talking about the Bollweevils, purely because the first review the Bollweevils ever got was by this big bloke that we knew called Paul Lester. Had a lot of ginger hair back in the day. Paul was a really nice guy, and he came along to the very first Bollweevils gig, and he wrote this astounding review, and it was in, I think it was in Sounds or NME, and we ended up reproducing it for years because it was wonderful. He came out with comments like, "This is what electricity tastes like." You know, it was very, very enthusiastic, but it's impossible to know what he was actually saying. And he wrote his second review on a band called Planet Wilson, who I didn't hear. I didn't go and see them. And he came to our house, and he used, I'd actually got a very early word processor, and he wanted to use it so we could print it out and make it look good. And he wrote this review of Planet Wilson, and I then sort of proofread it for him. And I said, "Blimey, they sound absolutely amazing." And he said, "No, not really. They're all right." I said, "But your review makes them sound brilliant." And he said, "Yeah, no one needs to know what the band were actually like. I need to entertain my reader. And that is far more interesting and important than whether the band can actually play their instruments or sing a good song." And I remember being baffled by that and thinking, well, you haven't got much of a chance in the music industry. And then he went on to edit several of these music papers, and has ended up, I think, with Mojo, running that these days.
Oh God!
So,
I wish they'd have someone else on the cover than Bob Dylan or I don't know, the Beatles.
Those tend to be the same people time and time again, but they do need to sell copies.
They need to sell copies. I know. I often laugh because a friend of mine subscribed to Mojo, and they haven't had a woman on the cover for quite a few months. It's either going to be Kate Bush or I don't know who else, actually. There's only two women they ever have.
But they haven't had Tori Amos, who's the...
Yeah, I haven't seen Tori for a while, but I don't know. What won't freak out the men? I think Kate Bush is the safe. Or Stevie Nicks, I guess, actually.
I was going to say the same thing, yeah.
Stevie, I don't know. I do have Reedley, and I love looking at all the covers that they've had. Oh, there's Kate Bush again, and... I think I'm just drawing a blank, actually. It's so rare when there is a woman on the cover. You could imagine them thinking. I did once see there was an ABBA cover, but I'm sure the person never went back to work after that one. No. Whoever made that decision. So when you got the 16, then going back, was this the early 80s that you hit 16 in?
Yeah, in about 84, I was reading 1984, and the world seemed pretty bleak. And it must have been then. I've got a copy of the Department of Enjoyment cassette.
Oh, blimey, you've got all those. So have you got all those NME cassettes?
No, I've only got a few of them.
I went and got all of them because I was sad like that. And there's a whole pile. I was trying to organise stuff over Christmas. And and cassettes started to appear, which seemed very important, didn't they?
I think, did we have to sort of send 99p and a couple of tokens or something to get...
a postal order or something, or if you could get someone to give you a check, and all. So there was all these reggae ones, and there was, and obviously a grubby C86 one as well there. Yes.
I absolutely loved Department of Enjoyment because it had a Cocteau Twins track I couldn't find anywhere else, and it was the first time I'd ever heard Lloyd Cole and the Commotion's Perfect Skin. And it had the Waterboys, amazing, A Pagan Place.
God.
It was absolutely astounding. So when C86 itself came out, I'd gone to university at that point.
In Sheffield?
Yes, and I'd heard quite a few of the bands, and I'd seen a few of the bands, and we all had very strong feelings on who should and shouldn't have been included.
Oh, brilliant.
And it was a good...
So what was your first gig you went to? You had your first single, but what was the gig you were christened?
I went to see Toyah. I was taken by a neighbour.
Superb.
And she was supported by Fad Gadget, who I thought was amazing.
God, very impressive. You ticked that one off for $2.99.
So he had a song called Lady Shave. So he covered himself in shaving foam and shaved himself on stage, which was quite something to watch.
I was going to say, all you 17, 18-year-old boys must have been very confused.
Absolutely. But I think I realised that music didn't actually have to be musical. It could be interesting and confrontational.
Because Toya had done the classic, hadn't she? Mystery and Dance and Universe. And had she appeared on Eddie's Shoestring at that stage? God, I remember her on Eddie's Shoestring.
I think she was on Shoestring around about that time, because I wasn't allowed to watch it.
Weren't you?
Because I wasn't allowed to stay up that late.
9 o'clock.
Yeah, well... I
can't remember what time Eddie's Shoestring was on, really.
No, but I'd heard her on around about sort of, between the 8 and 10 o'clock shift on Radio 1, whatever it would have been. And I think I heard Danced, and she sung, it was IR, because she sang about the Necronomicon. And I'd been reading H.P. Lovecraft, who writes about the Necronomicon. And I then bought... the first one I bought was her live album, Toya, 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 a wonderful title. And I went and bought Sheep Farming in Barnet, which had Nostradamus' quatrains on the back. And it was all sort of mixed up with my reading of sort of strange supernatural and occult fiction.
I mean, were you dabbling in the dark, black, I don't know, whatever arts they are? Was Crowley on your radar at this stage?
Yeah, being about sort of, 15 years old, I don't think I could quite dabble, but I was, I did buy Moonchild and The Diary of a Drug Fiend by Aleister Crowley at that time.
Fantastic.
Which I'm sure I missed the subtleties of. So yeah, Toya was my first gig. And then when I went, because I was in rural Sussex, I didn't see many gigs. I saw a few big names like Dire Straits and The Police. But I did manage to see the Undertones, which was great. And then I went off to Sheffield University, and as I was arriving in the city, there was a huge poster for The Fall playing at the university about 2 nights later. And I just thought I was in heaven. And in that first week at university, I met Mark Johnson, and we went out to see gigs sort of 2 or 3 times a week. And, we just thought it was wonderful. The amount of bands we saw, it was a revelation as far as I was concerned anyway.
God, I know, it would have been amazing, wasn't it? That would have been, so that was 84, 85 you were your first year?
About 85, I think I went to university. So The Fall, I'd fallen in love with the Hex Induction Hour album, which had been given to me by a friend, Nick. And their album, This Nation's Saving Grace, had come out. But there was a massive poster, the size of a small house, which I took from the back wall of the lower refectory after they'd played the gig and took back to my room and found it wouldn't fit on my wall, and I had to cut it down. I was just in heaven. I was such a mad fan of music, and the fact that there was always a gig just about every night in Sheffield at that time was wonderful.
That would have been, yes, your parents would have hated that poster, wouldn't they? That would have, would have felt even more rebellious at that stage. God, and it was all about SWP and TVP and, a quality diet, special brew. No, was it special brew? What was were you good at sort of leaving home at that stage? I
was very good at leaving home. I was more than ready to go. I was lucky because I came from a small village called Horham, which has nothing to commend it, apart from the fact that the Merrydown cider factory was there for many years. And we all knew people who worked in the factory. And when the labels were stuck on upside down, I think we used to buy the seconds, the rejected bottles, for about 13.5p a bottle.
Right.
And I still knew friends, so I took up to Sheffield several crates of Merrydown.
Blimey, because that's about, is it 7%? 6%? It's quite strong, isn't it?
It was quite strong. At one point, it was the drink of choice of tramps because it was the most alcohol you could get for your money.
Yes.
If you did the calculation.
That's fantastic. I do remember there was quite a few cider places around where we live, but it was when we went to festivals, Scrumpy seemed to be the thing, wasn't it? The drink of choice for those those moments of getting wasted, which was
I think Merrydown tried to sort of claim it was a superior, higher class drink. They weren't fooling anyone, but
yes, it was a bit like a with Nell and I line, wasn't it? There. So what course were you doing at Sheffield?
I did architecture. I chose the longest course I could find, so I could be a student for as long as possible. It took 7 years altogether, and in the first 6 years I was in Sheffield, and the seventh I then moved away, and spent most of it living in a house in Hunter's Bar with Mark Johnson, basically making music and writing stuff. And I started my small press, Tartarus Press, which is what I do now for a living, and I'm still somehow, sort of 35 years later, I'm making a living at it.
God, that's so impressive. Were you a fanzine writer at all?
No, I never really got into fanzines. It always seemed like money I could spend on either drink or a record, even though fanzines were usually stupidly cheap. I did buy a few. I've got a few sitting inside record sleeves where they were relevant. But with my girlfriend at the time, Roz, who's my wife now, we started a band contact service, which we called Via, which it got lots of publicity, but never quite took off. And the idea was that if you were in a band and gigging locally, you'd contact a band in another part of the country and organise a reciprocal gig, so that you'd know that there'd always be an audience, because the band you're working with would bring along their mates, and then you'd bring along your mates when they played with you.
God, that's such a good holistic idea.
Yeah, it just never quite took off, unfortunately. But it meant that the Bollweevils played gigs. I remember we sort of had return gigs in Newcastle with a band called the Gnostics, and also with a band from Hull called the Penny Candles. And then they both came to Sheffield. We had a gig at the Hallamshire, which at the time was the biggest gig anyone had played. We must have had at least 75 people there in a small room above a pub.
Yes, God, it was quite interesting, because what you were saying earlier about there was 3, weekly music papers, and there was like the John Peel Show, and there was Kid Jensen, and then Janice Long. But then there was every, like Town City had an alternative indie night. So there was a sort of a lovely kind of community, that you could get onto that sort of circuit with a little transit van and a very keen little promoter, and suddenly there was a scene which gave bands a little bit of hope, was a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, as they sort of thought we could make it
we were really, really pleased when Radio Sheffield played some of the songs that we'd written and recorded. There was a program called The Hard Stuff on a Sunday night, and I'm sure most local BBC radio stations would do that when no one else was listening. They would play, local bands and indie music or alternative music. It was, there was a very nice scene going on.
Yes. So when you and Mark were writing songs, was this part of you being part of the band at this point?
No, well, what initially happened was I met Mark in a hall of residence, and we realised we had a lot in common. Mark's just a really nice guy, and we would get together quite a few evenings a week with some Merrydown and just write songs for the fun of it. And at the end of the first year, I think we had enough songs. We sold a C90 compilation tape of our songs. I think we might have sold almost 8 or 9. And we were doing this for 2 or 3 years until I think it was Steve McKevitt came along and said, this should be a gigging band. At which point I had to say, well, I really can't play an instrument with any degree of competence. So I kind of took a bit of a back seat. I was still writing with Mark, still writing the lyrics, because Mark was always doing the music. I did the lyrics. And then I just took over doing things like, I had a job with the Peak District National Park for a year, and I had use of photocopiers, telephones, franking machines, Letraset. Got through a lot of Letraset making.
Yes, well, God, you're really hitting the whole sort of ticking every box here.
The band recorded demo cassettes, which I would then be sending off. I wasn't really the manager. What would usually happen is that members of the band would say, "I've got an address for a particular promoter or venue or record label. Can you send copies of the new demo to them?" So I was sending this stuff off, and I was organising gigs from work. People got used to the fact that I wasn't actually doing anything that I was meant to be employed doing. They would hear the word Bollweevils over the phone quite a lot. But then, yes, things kind of changed. The band were doing well. They got the, I think it was Mark actually who sent off the important tape that went to Decoy.
Decoy. So, what songs did you write with, with the band? What were your contributions?
Well, of the recorded songs, the first EP, "Talk to Me."
Yes, which is a classic song.
Yeah,
and a great cover. Who did the cover?
That was Mark's dad, and I think it was a fairly last minute. Oh crap! We need something that will actually go on the front of the record. And Mark's dad was a keen photographer. So yeah, "Talk to Me" was mine. "Hold Me Up to the Light" and "It Cheers Me Considerably." So 3 of the 4 songs were mine.
Blimey, I've played "Talk to Me" a lot actually. Because I just think her vocal, the song is just incredible.
Yeah, it's just a song. Yeah, Mark wrote a brilliant song for my lyrics. And of course, what happened was that the record came out, and in my diary, I noted that John Peel still isn't playing it. And then we got a phone call one afternoon from John Waters saying, "It's going to be played on the radio this evening." And we were just delighted. So we contacted all of our friends. We went to the pub first, went to the Lescar, I think it was, in Charivale, on Charivale Road, and all piled back to our house. So there must have been sort of 20 or 30 people in our front room. And John Peel sort of played 2 or 3 songs, and then he said he would now play the new Bollweevils EP. And of the 4 songs on there, one wasn't written by me, and that's the one he played. So, of course, the whole house erupted, everyone going, "Yes, we're on John Peel." And I was sitting there thinking, "You bastard."
Oh, no, God.
But I got a chance to talk to John Peel many years later when he was doing Home Truths. I did one of his shows about something completely different, nothing to do with music. And the line went down for a while. They couldn't record it. So we got chatting about football. And when he found that I was a Brighton supporter, he said, "It's not worth talking to you about football." And we talked about music. And I told him the story about how he hadn't played my song or any of my songs. And he was very sweet. He said, "Oh, I remember the Bollweevils. Yeah, that was a great EP." And I said, "Well, that's very nice of you, but you are just being kind. I don't know how many tens of thousands or hundreds of ththousands of songs you've played show. You won't remember that." And he said, "No." He said, "I'm not the most, I can't remember quite how he said it, but he was basically saying, I'm not the most clever bloke in the world, but music I know, and I don't forget a song, and I don't forget a record." And he said, "Yeah, I remember that." It was a brilliant song. That's why I played it. And I said, "Yeah, I know. It's the one that I didn't write."
Yes. So did you then write anything for Life's a Scream at this stage? Did you?
Well, what happened was there were 2 more EPs. There was Mouth, which didn't have anything of mine, and then there was an EP which wasn't released. And then later on, we discovered them all on a CD that had been brought out called "Life's a Scream." And there was one other song on there of mine called "Out of Time."
Right.
I think I wrote that before I'd ever heard that the Rolling Stones had got a song called "Out of Time." But what happened was that when the band started gigging, we were all just mates. It was a great time. I was standing at the back operating the drum machine, usually quite ineptly. Sometimes I even did the lights if the lighting engineer hadn't turned up. I would collect the money occasionally when they got paid, because it looked more professional to have someone else to collect the money who wasn't actually in the band. But I kind of started drifting away and didn't go to all the gigs, and I knew I was going to be moving away anyway. So I kind of left as they were on a high, really, expecting great things. And then, of course, it all kind of unravelled after I left, sadly.
Right. It was Steve Singleton. Was he the one who was going to record their second single, but he didn't get...
Yeah, no, I think Steve might have helped them with Mouth. I think he's on. I've got a copy here. There's also stuff on the back about Vidal Sassoon and stuff that wasn't quite so important, but it's recorded at Red Tape. And no, they kind of got a bit bogged down with technology, and the big mistake with hindsight, and hindsight is a wonderful thing, was that they were persuaded to get professional management, because sort of all of us on an ad hoc basis phoning people up and sending stuff off wasn't particularly impressive. And they found this professional management team up in Glasgow, I think it was. It was a partnership, two blokes. And unfortunately, one of them had a shady past, and I think he then went on to have a shady future. And the band had been booked into the Windings, a residential studio in North Wales, to record their first album. And it was meant to be sort of money up front, and it took a while. And Mark Johnson, when you talked to him, didn't use the guy's name. And I can't, because I can't remember his name, but we knew him as Bunhead, because he had a lot of buns. And Bunhead then turned up with half the money halfway through, and at the end of the recording, they said, "We need paying." And Bunhead basically, I don't know if he skipped the country, but he let down his partner, his life partner, and everyone he knew, ran off with all the money.
Oh.
So the band had to leave, unfortunately, with the Windings studio saying, "Well, where's our money?" And they kept all of the master tapes. So the band didn't have anything that they could release. At which point, certain members of the band decided that they'd had enough of the whole thing. Mark and Sarah went on to form a new band called Bolster. And that was the end of the Bollweevils. It was very, very sad, because they were sounding brilliant at that point. The songwriting got so much more assured. Sarah's lyrics were great, because she was trying to sing my lyrics before.
Yes.
I tended to have too many syllables in each line. Sarah actually wrote stuff that fitted, and also worked with her voice, which was incredibly strong and really good. And Mark was moving away from the sort of the indie mold that we had, and he was getting noisier with his guitar. He was getting much more. He'd always been a big Husker Du fan.
Yes, he mentioned that, Minneapolis.
And we'd all been huge fans of Sonic Youth, and the band was getting it was sounding pretty darned impressive. And that album would have been incredibly good, but
I just didn't know. God, that is so sad and tragic, because in a bizarre way, I think I don't know, there's the Seattle grunge scene, and then the beginnings of Britpop. They could have probably had a couple of moments in the limelight, really, at that stage, couldn't they?
Yeah, I think if they had the right management, i.e. any management other than the one that they had.
Than Bunhead.
Then yes, they could have gone on to great things.
Have you Googled not his real name? Has anyone ever found out?
We did, and we have found that he does merit mention in certain local papers in Scotland. He was up before a magistrate once or twice.
I would imagine. God, how do people live like that? So then your 90s, is this when you started your press at this point?
I started, the first thing I published was in 1990. And Ros, my girlfriend, I'd given up work at the Peak Park, but she was still there. And she photocopied on the work photocopier my first publication. So it was all still, letraset photocopying. Cutting and pasting meant glue and scissors. And the proper old-fashioned way of publishing, initially booklets and then proper books.
My God, you were very prolific, weren't you? The Anatomy of Taverns, A Diary of a Successful Man.
That was the very, very first. It was a guide to Arthur Macken's favourite pubs.
Right, and then then you just, my God, you were really. So did you just learn on the job how to be a publisher?
Yeah, completely. Yeah.
Oh my God, that is incredible. And then when did you start writing yourself?
I'd always written, because I'd always written poetry and lyrics. When I was at school, I was in a band called the Trug Concept. So when I met Mark, Mark had not played live, but I'd actually played some gigs. I mean, I sounded pretty awful. My singing was pretty ropey. So I'd always written, but it wouldn't really be until, I don't know, around about 2000 and something that I first started seriously writing. I was about 40. And I've now published, I think, 4 novels and 4 or 5 short story collections and various books
Yes.
of nonfiction.
My God, you have really. So then you decided the 50 forgotten records that
Yeah.
came out. When did you get this kind of idea? When did the spark hit you for this?
Well, I was commissioned by a Sheffield publisher called And Other Stories to write a book called 50 Forgotten Books, which went really well. And it was about sort of the books in my life. And because it had gone so well and I'd enjoyed writing it, I thought, well, music is just as important. And I could do exactly the same thing, but with the records that have been important in my life that I would like to recommend other people consider listening to. So that's how that came about.
And how fast did this come about? I mean, how sort of from the initial idea to sort of managing to complete it? How long was your project?
It probably only sort of took 3 or 4 months to write. But it was helped partly because I did try writing a biography of the Bollweevils, then failed to find a publisher for it. My attempt to sell the book as a biography was very much that you have all these biographies of bands out there, but their bands always make it. That's why you're reading it. So I was writing a biography of bands that never quite made it. Because I still think that the more interesting side to any band's story is how they make it in the first place, not what they do once they've become famous. So I had a lot of the information about the 80s and the 90s and my own interests already to hand. So I kind of pilfered a lot of things from that book to make 50 Forgotten Records.
Yes, my God, and it was so well sort of put together. It's kind of fascinating, sort of, because I do love, and actually you were talking about John Peel show and stuff, but it's interesting that quite a lot of those shows have gone up on the internet, and it's kind of interesting seeing the set list that he puts together, which in a way they want that, it's just kind of a curiosity because I still think that his mix of music is kind of fascinating, and like you said, there's always a few duffs, but even they've got something kind of intriguing about them. But your 50 list was kind of like beautifully put together.
Thank you.
Which I think must have just been kind of a delight to do. Did you struggle to sort of fit 50 in, or did you still have 100 and then have to get down to 50?
Yeah, I think I had about 150 to start off with. And then I took out the obvious ones. They're all, the obvious records are mentioned there in the book, in the text, but the ones I've chosen to talk about, for example, I've always been a huge fan of Kate Bush, but there's no point in talking about most of her records. But when I was in Sheffield, I remember buying Night of the Swallow and finding that it was only ever released in Ireland. She sings in a sort of cod Irish accent, which she's allowed to do because she is part Irish. And again, I'm was a huge fan of Blondie back in the day, and I found a copy of Little GTO by the New York Blondes. And I remember being very impressed as a teenager, working out that it was Debbie Harry singing, and subsequently found out that it was the rest of the band as well. So I was able to write about some quite big names, but some of their odd records.
Well,
and
yes.
Just had great fun mentioning bands that, it's like AC Temple back in the day in Sheffield. I thought they were brilliant. I thought they were better than Sonic Youth back in the day. And I could go and see them as well, whereas I couldn't see Sonic Youth.
No, absolutely. My God, the Kate Bush one is kind of, because yes, she up to sort of Red Shoes was one of those artists that I just adored, and I still think her first, was it Never Forever, the first album she did? Because there's that song,
the first one's The Kick Inside.
The Kick Inside, that has that song towards the dancer that David Bowie always talks about, doesn't he? Moving.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a song called Moving. Yeah.
And that is, God, who was the guy that David Bowie always goes on about that he learned to use mime with?
Oh, the mime artist. Yeah. I know
Yes.
she worked with him. I can't remember his name now. Yeah, it wasn't Marcel Marceau.
No, it wasn't him. But again, it was kind of a fascinating. So yeah, so putting this list together, it must have just been kind of a fascinating sort of exercise in sort of yes, obscurity. Have you always gone for quite obscure artists? Has it always been your thing?
Not necessarily. Although as a teenager with very little disposable income, and also trying to buy books and and alcohol, we did discover, sort of various friends, that in Max Records in Eastbourne, there was a sort of 10 or 20p section of records that hadn't sold, and they hadn't sold because no one had heard of them. And you could come away with, for a couple of quid, a great pile of records, and they were all interesting. You'd make yourself listen to them, 20 or 30 times, so that you did actually enjoy them and understand them. And that's where we came away with bands like the Instant Automatons. And there was also a second-hand, a camera shop in Hailsham, which had obscure singles sort of being sold in the back. And where on earth do some of these bands, come from? I remember playing golf with my flesh crawling by gosh, I can't remember the name of the band now. I don't know. This sort of whole subculture of people who were putting out records that were never going to make it, I did find fascinating. But yes, at the same time, I was a big fan of Blondie.
Well, that was, I think, I was going to say my second single, but it was my third one. Rod Stewart's Sailing was the second one, which was, but Blondie's, when I saw her on Top of the Pops doing Denis Denis, I just thought, oh my God, that's just heaven sent, And I can't remember who the original was, but it was by 1962. Something, it's not Rudolph the Reindeer, but it was some strange sort of bebop band from the early 60s, which was quite interesting. But again, B-sides were always very good on singles, because it was, I think, Kung Fu Girl and Contact in Red Square were the B-sides. Yeah. And again, it was just like, oh, that's kind of awesome. I know, because you're obviously, a lot of your sort of obscure records are from the 80s, because another of my favourite bands were Yeah Yeah No, which was
a wonderful band.
Another side to Mrs. Quill. My favourite was Stealing in the Name of the Lord, which I thought was just, I still play that endlessly, because I just think that is such a great song. So did you, I mean, with a band like that, did you have one single or one record that you thought, that's the one, rather than... And did you have to? Are these the sort of just the single tracks, not the albums?
Well, I did have the singles, although some of them came along later. I had the LP "Mowing the Heavenly Lawn of Greatness," and "Now I Am a Big Girl," I think, was another of their albums. I did incredibly well in Rare and Racy in Sheffield. They had secondhand records. And quite a lot of my, all of my Gun Club collection came from there. And I'm pretty sure that's where I bought Yeah Yeah No. We went and saw their last ever gig. I mean, they've reformed since.
Yes.
They announced that they were playing their last ever gig in Leicester. So we got on the National Express coach. I went down with Steve McKevitt and Tim Donkin and a few others. And it was such a great night, and it was their last night, so they did some encores, and they finished late. So when we got back to the bus station, we'd missed the last coach, and it was winter, and it was bloody freezing. And it was so cold, we were actually afraid that we might, die of exposure. So I think we broke into a disabled toilet, and there was about sort of 8 blokes. We took turns at one person could sit on the toilet, and the rest of us stood up. And vaguely kept warm all night, because we were all in this confined space. And that's my main memory of the last Yeah Yeah No gig, apart from the fact that I took a poster off the wall, which I've still got in my room. I've got it framed up on the wall. It's got slashes in it, because they obviously didn't want people taking the posters. And I got shouted at, and someone threatened to chase after me because I'd taken a poster for a gig that was over by a band that had finished.
Yes, and you had to sort of protect it in a toilet with 8 other men. That's amazing. That is quite a story, actually, I have to say. I mean, little, would one ever believe that now, really? I mean, yes, going to gigs and having that fright of whether you're going to get home or not, but then realizing it's worth it because you want to hear the encore was always, a price worth paying, really, wasn't it?
I'm not sure if Mark or Sarah mentioned it, but back in the day when the Bollweevils were still going, and I was with Roz and she had a car, she drove half the band and me to St Helens for a gig. And I'm sure it was bonfire night. And we parked in a multi-storey car park, and the gig went ahead, and we came back to the car park and they'd locked it. And it was a Saturday night, and it wasn't going to be open until Monday. So we had no way of getting back from St Helens. And sort of thereafter, a very long and convoluted story could ensue. After a few drinks, we revisit all the problems we had, eventually getting back several days later from a gig. But that was all part of the fun.
Because that happened to me once, parking on a piece of wasteland, thinking that's great, what a clever idea, and then coming back and somebody had locked it and thinking. So what did you have to spend 2 days in this place?
Well, initially we were told that there was somebody in the car park if we could find them. So Mark and I climbed up a couple of stories and wandered around and found that would have been a lie. We then presented ourselves at the local police station and said, could we have a cell for the night? And they said, bugger off. And I think we eventually got a very drunken taxi driver in the fog to drive us back to, I think it might have been Steve's house, because he lived in Burscough, which wasn't far from St Helens, but far enough on a foggy night. And then we spent another night at someone else's hall of residence, and then we got back on the Monday on a bus to St Helens and liberated Rosalie's car.
Jesus, that's extraordinary. I mean, God, it's amazing that you haven't all sort of had a sort of reunion party to reminisce about some of these events.
Oh, if I meet up with Mark and Sarah and we have a few drinks, some of these things do come out.
Yes, and you also got the great that petrol emotion, which is in here as well, which obviously
Wonderful band.
They were, and I remember seeing them at the UEA actually when they were just appearing, because yes, Big Decision was one of those really fascinating, because
educate and organise,
which was taken from Brother D and the Collective Effort, wasn't it? Sort of a rap band from America, which I then had to sort of track down and sort of buy a copy, because I was going through a rap phase at that point, as well as roots reggae as well. So yes, did you get to see them live at all?
Yeah, well, in fact, I'd seen the Undertones on their last tour and loved them, and then they announced that they were splitting up, and the rest of the band, basically everyone apart from Fergal, was becoming that Petrol Emotion, and Steve Mack was singing. And I think I heard a record and thought, I'm not sure if I like this, because he wasn't Fergal, basically. And we went along and we saw them at the Limit in Sheffield, and they just were brilliant. The energy, it was just wonderful. It was one of the best nights I've had, and we saw. I think they seem to play at the Limit every 6 months, and the Limit Club in Sheffield was really quite special, and everyone eulogises the Lead Mill, which was great and important. But the Limit, they had a stage which was sheathed in stainless steel. I think the floor, the sides, and the roof. So as soon as it got hot and sweaty in there, the condensation, which was basically sweat, was just dripping from the ceiling like rain on everyone's equipment. And as far as I know, no one ever died or electrocuted themselves.
Yes,
but that was a great atmosphere there, and there were loads of bands like that. The Men They Couldn't Hang and the Mighty Lemon Drops, and they're all playing the Limit, and it was
classic. And you got Felt in here, dear old Lawrence. Actually, I'm surprised you haven't got Momus. Actually, he's one of those legends that a cult hero from that period. But Lawrence is certainly there. Did you ever come across Momus Was he on
No,
your radar at all?
not really at all. No, I've always known the name, and I'm sure I've heard things, but
I think I was sharing a house with somebody who liked slightly torturous music, and Momus was one of those ones that he played. And
I just love Lawrence from Felt, his voice on Penelope Tree. I mean, if I was going to be gay, I would fall in love with Lawrence's voice. He just sounds wonderful. And everything he's done since has been interesting and good. The various bands and iterations of things he's been in.
Well, when he did Denim, he did a song, the Osmonds, which I think is lyrically such a clever song. I don't know if it's about 6 minutes, but it describes Birmingham and the Birmingham bombing, and that doesn't really sell it, does it? But if you listen to it, there is something incredible. It's kind of genius. And it's kind of fascinating. So you kind of end up listening to it a lot, thinking, this is an amazing song. Did you read Will Hodgkinson's book on Lawrence that he did?
No.
A Year in the Life of Lawrence or something like that, which I have somewhere, which I can't see. But yes.
I was a huge fan, and it's one of those things about when you're a big fan and you're obsessed by certain bands, when they come together and work together, it's just like Christmas. And I remember Liz Fraser singing with Felt.
Yes.
And just thinking, wow, two of my favourite bands creating something astounding, because the Cocteau Twins have always been, I think the album I play more than any other is, and I still play it every few days, is Head Over Heels by the Cocteau Twins, closely followed by their first album, Garlands. No one's ever quite captured the magic of them. That's probably my favourite band and my favourite albums of all time.
Actually, it was Treasure that I absolutely loved, actually.
Which is brilliant as well. Yeah, absolutely gorgeous. Yeah.
I seem to, and sort of, then there was people like Dead Can Dance as well, which were, I think
they were much more dark, weren't they? Yeah.
They were dark. But when you're, being pretentious in the 80s, it felt very important. You'd watch Betty Blue and Rosalind and the Lions and anything by David Lynch to sort of just...
Yeah, well, and my first band at school was the Trug Concept, and it was a pretentious title because we were taking the piss out of those other sixth formers who were pretentious. And we gave ourselves stage names, which were anagrams of pretentious. So my stage name was Euston Pirret, and other band members were Pete Tawney and Stu Pontier, I seem to remember, was our drummer. I think we couldn't have had more than 4 members because we couldn't think of another anagram.
That's Did you ever make a recording of your band? Have you got any cassettes or?
Oh yeah, I mean, but in the talking about lo-fi, we would record the bass and drums onto through a condenser microphone onto a tape, and then we would play that through an amp, and to get the levels, I would either be, a certain distance, and the guitar would be a different distance away from the condenser microphone again. So you try and get your levels right and get all the instruments. And it was a horrible, muddied mess by the end, but it was our horrible, muddied mess.
Well, absolutely. And it's nice that you got Toyah in this as well, actually, haven't you, with the album Toyah. So yes, is she somebody that you still have fond feelings and sort of interest?
I still listen to those early albums and enjoy them. She reminds me too much these days of some of my aunts, which is worrying. So no, I've not kept up with Toyah since. I did buy Anthem, but I liked the earlier stuff, and I didn't really listen to anything after It's a Mystery.
No.
I found slightly embarrassing.
It's a Mystery.
Yeah, well, I went to school with my Toyah badge on just before It's a Mystery came out, and everyone said, "Who's this Toyah?" And suddenly It's a Mystery was out, and everyone was taking the piss out of me, and I thought they had a point. But I still love the earlier stuff.
Yes.
But it's all part of being pretentious. You have to love, a band or an artist's early work, not their commercial work.
Well, yeah, I do remember going back about 3 decades. Someone said, "Oh, I only like the first album when they couldn't play their instruments, but after that, you know." And I do remember that kind of, yes, it's so important. And they're on a unknown record label, and then they
Yeah.
get signed to any other, and it's like, oh, they're sold out, and they can play their instruments. It's boring, and it's like,
Well, one of the things I wanted to do in 50 Forgotten Records was to credit the people who introduced me to the music that I love. Because it was that thing at school that you would say, so, you know, who's the Velvet Underground? And people say, why do you not know them? You know, as though they somehow at birth had this knowledge. We've all had to learn somewhere. So, you know, I've made a point in the book of, you know, thanking, you know, Nick King for introducing me to The Fall. And, you know, without Danny Goring, I would never have listened to so much Neil Young. Chris Coyle, who was the drummer in the Bollweevils early on, he was a huge indie fan, and he introduced me to Lush and Ride, and I've still got cassettes that he made for me back in the day.
my God, that's
We,
impressive.
we all have to learn from someone.
Well, especially in those days, because you didn't just, you know, put in a search engine and sit there on your computer, spending your time. It was going to record libraries, picking up it was a sleeve, or you got a book. You know, my brother had a book about sort of classic albums during that time in the 70s or 80s. And it was like, you know, The Incredible String Band or Captain Beefheart were always kind of in there. And I'd get them at the record library, obviously record them, and then try to listen to these classics going, Jesus Christ, this is...
Well, I first heard Beefheart on Peel, and I had him on a tape doing, I think, Blabber and Smoke from the Spotlight Kid. And I just thought, this is astounding. And I had real problems finding his albums. And then it must have been about 2010, a mate of mine opened up a record shop. And for 3 or 4 years, I worked in his record shop on a Saturday, and I was paid in records. And the idea was that I was going to fill the gaps in my record collection, because I'd got a couple of Beatles albums and a couple of Stones albums. And every evening I'd go home with a couple more, filling all the gaps. And then someone came in with an amazing Beefheart collection. I mean, I think there was a Zappa collection as well, which I was less interested in. And I made sure that I didn't sell them to anyone. And I slowly took them home week after week. So I now have a complete Beefheart collection.
Fantastic. I must admit, I do like, there's an album he did on Virgin Records, which I know is terribly commercial and is terrible, but that's why I really like a lot of the songs. There's something like Full Moon. And it's just, you know, This Is the Day Love Came to Stay and stuff like that. Very sentimental, which is kind of my go-to. And I just thought, these are great lyrics, but obviously you can't admit that anywhere, because people go, oh, God, it's just so commercial. That was terrible. He was being manipulated by the producer. It's like, oh, okay.
Anything Beefheart did was gold, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And with your collection, though, you don't just stick in the past, do you? You sort of go right up to the sort of almost the modern day, don't you? Well,
almost. That's the big problem, isn't it? That as you get older, it's more and more difficult to hear music where you don't think, oh, that sounds like someone else, or I've heard that before.
Yes.
And I think because my parents stopped listening to music when they were sort of 19, I never wanted to stop listening to new music. But it gets harder and harder, especially these days, there is so much old music which you can explore, you know, online. I've got my computer set up through my amp, and I can play music loud that I'm finding on YouTube.
Yeah. Well, I think what I found, you know, I don't really like playing the music that I'm familiar with from my past, but it was all the records that came and went that I missed. And sort of playing catch up has been quite interesting, because, you know, it's just, that was impossible. You know,
you'll never finish catching up. No.
And it's just like, my God. And it's embarrassing that thinking, no, I didn't hear the sound the first time, or the Chameleons I didn't really catch the first time. You know, there was all these bands, but then there were other bands you were listening to. There was only so much you could consume and only so much you could afford. So, you know, there's no wonder. But there was just a lot, you know, when you heard Easterhouse, and, you know, from Manchester, you think, God, this is a great album, you know, again. But they would, you know, you have to admit, you know, in a confessional...
It's only in the last few years I've discovered Talk Talk. I mean, I remember them at the time, and I remember the hits. But buying, you know, the rest of Mark Hollis's work, I've realised, well, what a genius he was. Why wasn't I not listening to this 30 years ago?
I find the production is really tricky, though. I find, it's one of those ones, it's like so 80s, and I just think, oh, I wish they could remix it. I don't know. There was something, because there was, the 80s was so divided at the time. There was the Red Wedge indie John Peel world, and then there was the Blitz Kids and New Romantics and Spandau Ballet, and then the Trevor Horn production sound, which I still find it just makes me feel sort of like the uneasy and a bit sort of.
It was never as bad as Stock Aitken and Waterman or anything like that.
No, but there was something quite.
Yeah, there is a different. Yeah, there's a drum sound and a bass sound, and they're all mixed very similarly.
Yes, and I think when I've watched Talk, you watch clips, the bass player has that problem, doesn't he, of holding it very high, up to his neck.
That's definitely a school playground thing, because it was at Heaven 17, wasn't it, where he had his bass under his chin, and everyone used to take the mickey out of him.
Yes, well, I guess you would have never had that problem with Steve, would you, with the Bollweevils?
No, well, I mean, Steve was concentrating. No one can ever hold a guitar or a bass like the Ramones, and I think that was because I did see them sort of fairly late on. But if you're really cool, your guitar should be down by your feet. It should be that far away. It helps.
I think Peter Hook wasn't he? He was quite stooped and low. So how did you then, when John Peel passed, it was horrendous. I had nowhere to go. I had no reference point. I couldn't trust anybody, definitely Six Music. I mean, you look at what they played and you think, hey, I'm not even bothered. And it feels like it's done by committee. John Peel was just a massive loss. How did you navigate that period then?
Partly, I think Six Music in its early days was pretty good, because it was definitely, they've always said that it's for people who love music, and it was full of nerds. Like Phil Jupitus was a complete nerd, talking to other nerds and playing music. So I enjoyed it. It's become very commercial now, albeit that it's one of the better stations. But I discovered MySpace back in the early days of MySpace. It was a really supportive, friendly community, and I started composing music and putting music on there, and discovered all kinds of little bands that never made it. And made connections with people, and thoroughly got sort of got a lot of joy out of that little world. And then, of course, they wanted to commercialize it and make money out of it. And like most internet, especially social media things, it had its day, and I don't think anyone goes back now. It's very weird being nostalgic about the things that were on the internet. I mean, the internet should still be the future as far as I'm concerned. But MySpace was great. I came across bands like Car Crash Nightmares, and I actually put out a couple of records on a record label I set up with a friend, just with music we'd found on MySpace. Found a mad Norwegian called Ring, who had kind of psychedelic folk music, and we brought out an album by Ian Holloway, who does Weird Britain these days. I'm still in contact with. Really nice guy. He does sort of ambient music, or drone music, because I discovered ambient and drone quite late in the day.
Right.
Having been a teenager and being very rude about Brian Eno, Ifka music, I suddenly got the point.
Yes, it does. But you've been releasing albums, haven't you, as well? From 2012, you did. Was it Ghosts that you did?
This was the first one, yeah.
And then you just got onto a roll. So is this your own label that you're releasing these on?
No, Ghosts was, a couple of them have been released by an album, by a label in Austria called Klang Gallery. Very, very nice guy called Walter Robotka, who I can't quite remember. He was buying books from me because he's a book dealer as well.
Right.
I told him I was making music with a French singer called Lidvine, who I'd found on MySpace. And we just got chatting, and she put some vocals to my music. And Walter liked it. And it was kind of dream come true after the problems I'd had with the Bollweevils and not being able to play music. My problem is I can't retain music. I can't, if I learn how to play a song, the next day I can't remember what I did.
Right.
It's incredibly frustrating. But composing music on a computer, I can do that, and it stays there, and I don't have to remember it. And we had a few teething problems because I'd started off using samples, and Lidveen hadn't been telling her partner what she was up to with her recording. When the album was about to come out, she played it to her partner, who complained that he could hear they were samples. And I thought, how the hell can he tell? And she kept referring to him as Hector. And when I looked up Hector Zazu, I found that he's a very, very well-respected producer and musician. And she hadn't mentioned, who her partner was. So I then had to get Mark Johnson to record me in his studio. He had a very nice studio in his cellar. And Mark just couldn't believe how bad my guitar playing was, and sort of sent me off to get some food and drink and said, come back in 2 or 3 hours. And when I did, he had managed to put all the right notes in the right places and in the right position, and it sounded great. So it was kind of me being sampled, and Hector was happy with that, and we got the thumbs up, and the album came out. And I had my one evening of being a pop star in Austria when we launched it only came out as a CD. I would have loved to have had it on vinyl, but
yes, my God, that's quite the kind of, yes, you must have been quite relieved that it got slightly sorted before it sort of went into public consumption.
Well, I was meant to be actually playing it live with Lidveen for the launch, and I was I'm trying to think of a nice way of saying shitting bricks. I was so scared, and then at the last moment she had to pull out. So I did a video presentation instead, which went down fine. And I thought, I'm never going to put myself through that again, because I cannot play a guitar or a keyboard with any competence whatsoever. On a computer, I can compose music. That's my instrument. I still sort of listen to people like, Mark Johnson, or my old mate from school, Danny Goring, still plays music, and he's got a wonderful way of playing guitar and great voice. And I just sort of, doff my cap, take my hat off to them. Can't believe what talented people they are.
Yes, absolutely. But there's 3 or 4 albums here, isn't there? So you've sort of plugged away with this.
Yeah.
This little passion.
I find it absolutely, I find it more, I think because I never expected to do it, I find it more satisfying than writing. I always had the ambition to be a writer. I fulfilled that. I'm really pleased. That's, really gives me great joy. But to actually make music, especially I think I started doing it at the advanced age of 40. I could never have imagined would happen.
No, even though you wrote a lot of those early songs for the band, obviously, yes, being the sort of centre person must be quite different.
It is incredibly fulfilling, but I found it fulfilling working with Mark back in the day, writing lyrics, because there were no politics. We were just 2 mates having fun, enjoying ourselves and being creative. And Mark is still an incredibly creative person, and Sarah is in her band now, Duck. I think she has flourished being in charge of her own band rather than being in a band with a load of blokes. And she's still playing gigs in Sheffield and still sounding brilliant, and bringing out some great records.
Yes.
Mark's band, Don't Sleep Dream, I think it's some of the best music he's ever made. I saw them play live a few years ago, and they were great, really, really good.
Well, hopefully they'll be able to sort of keep on making new music. So with the book, which is coming back to the book, so is it available from all good bookshops and also online?
It is. You can either buy it online through our website, or it can be ordered through any bookshop.
Right, blimey.
That's fantastic.
So it only came out last year?
Yes, I think so, yeah.
2025. This is fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, look, thank you ever so much for giving me the time for this, and thank you for the publication. Actually, yes, for the copy, because I'm very touched actually, and as you know, and it is bizarre, but in the when I started doing interviews with 80s bands, there was zero interest really in indie pop, and then in the last few years, every week there's another memoir that's come out from some band from that period, and then there's books on, I don't know, there's exhibitions, aren't there, films, documentaries on the most obscure film band you ever known. There was even one on Rima Rima, who were only in existence for sort of 8 months, did a few gigs, did one EP, and someone managed to do a sort of I think a 90-minute film about them, which was quite extraordinary. Which I, as a sort of person who loves watching these things, it's great, but it is just bizarre seeing it sort of blossom so much. So there was a curiosity to what happened 40 years ago, or 40 plus.
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, we couldn't hear that it was indie music. Everything sounded different. You listen back now and you can hear how all these bands sort of overlap with what they were doing. And yes, there was a scene there, or various scenes, lots of scenes overlapping, really. Somehow it does all fit together. Even you have sort of atonal bands like Bogshed.
Stump.
And then you've got, beautiful, jangly indie bands like the Sundays.
Yes, well, absolutely, dear old Harriet. I know. And what do they do now? What's their normal day? You know, sometimes you're curious. I mean, the most curious band of all the bands in the 80s, because they've just disappeared, is the Redskins, Christine. What happened to Chris? And
because they were on the Department of Enjoyment tape, weren't they? They did Kick Over the Statues.
And neither Washington nor Moscow. And they were such a vocal, they were there all the time. And suddenly to disappear so brilliantly, I think is quite a curiosity. And same a little bit with Harriet. What does Harriet do?
Well, some bands are reforming and coming back, and
oh god, yes, they get the offer of the Shine Shine weekend, or or just I don't know. I remember talking to members of the Darling Buds, and it was like, well, to be honest, we just do a gig here at the weekend. We won't give our day jobs up particularly, but we'll just enjoy it for what it is. And I think people dying sort of slightly, I can't remember if it was the Primitives. It was like suddenly finding one of the members that died and thinking, being at the funeral, or sort of getting in touch afterwards thinking, that's a bit sad, isn't it? And perhaps we should, do you fancy sort of getting together again?
Well, some bands like, No are gigging quite regularly these days and are writing new material, and their new material is great. And even Half Man, Half Biscuit are still churning out the albums, and they're still, very, very funny.
I know, good old Nigel. Yes. And he did one Eno collaboration, which you probably like.
Did he? No, I didn't know that.
God, listen to the lyrics of Eno collaboration. It will make you laugh. And there's another great song called It Makes the Room Look Bigger, which again is just lyrically genius. I mean, it's just so funny. Yes, they do have an amazing ability with words. So on that you mentioned C81, 86. Which one was your favourite?
On C86?
There was there was the two cassettes. There was a C81 cassette and a C86. I just wondered, did you have a preference for those?
No, because I think Department of Enjoyment was still my favourite, along with Enemy did the Pogo a Go-Go.
Oh yes,
with Punk, which was great. But with all of them, there was a bit like Peel. Half of them didn't work for me, and half of them did. And sometimes it wasn't always the best music. I mean, or the best songs by bands. I mean, the Soup Dragons were on C86, weren't they?
Yes.
That wasn't a great track, whereas I've always loved Head Gone Astray by the Soup Dragons, which I think was a B-side on something. And the Mighty Lemon Drops, I'm not sure it was...
That was a track.
That might have been Happy Head on there, so that probably was their best.
Yeah, I mean, I think some bands just were like, God, they're going to give us some money to record. Oh, we'll actually sort of record 5 songs and just give them one of the worst ones and keep the rest. I can't remember if that was Mighty Lemon Drops, actually. I was happy because I liked Like an Angel.
Yeah.
So that was quite interesting. It was good.
I mean, I loved Stump. And I love Bogshed. and The Wedding Present, and there were a few. I don't think Distance was a particularly good song.
It was a shame that June Brides decided they didn't want to be part of the indie scene, which I thought, Phil Wilson, what were you thinking? But actually, Neil Taylor, did you get the Neil Taylor book that he wrote about C86 a few years ago?
Yes, I did, but I haven't read it.
Because I just thought he just knew so much about the scene at that point.
Is that the one where he went back to talk to the bands that were on it?
No, that was Nigel Tassell. Whatever happened to the C86 kids?
Yes,
and that was quite jolly. But Neil Taylor, who was the person alongside two other people who did put the cassette together, wrote a very good book about the C86 world. And I suppose his knowledge was so good that it's one of those publications that you need to take a bit of a break after each chapter, because you just go away having to look even more. But actually, one book that you probably would love was the one written by Luke Haynes on Bad Vibes, where he talks, he really bitches. I mean, he obviously has played up, bitches about every other band and all his team bandmates, and especially certain record labels as well. And yes, it's very funny. And he's still making music with Peter Buck from REM. So
right.
So it's all good. But yes, there's a lot there. So, well, look, thank you ever so much for giving me the time for this. It's been amazing. When I put it up,
thank you for talking to me.
And yes, and you were sort of part of that whole history, which at the time, you only know bits of it, but little did we know how much went into making that Sheffield-based band that you were part of.
Yeah, it was just a very good time. I mean, I just remember it with a great deal of fondness, really.
Yes, I know. And
I'm so pleased that I'm still in contact with Mark and Sarah. Lost contact with a few other people. But it's, a big part of our lives.
Huge. It's great. Anyway, look, thank you ever so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Amazing.
It's been a really good excuse to talk about bands that I wouldn't normally be able to find anyone to talk to about.
No, it's always curious. Okay, take care. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And that, dear listener, is the end of the interview. A massive thank you to R.B. Russell for giving me the time for that. This has been the C86 Show, David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, you can on any of the social media platform sites. Just do C86 Show. All these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. Have a great week. Stay safe.